Fantasy, like any other genre, has its tropes. Tropes are familiar and repeated symbols, themes, characters, or things that just permeates the genre. In other words, it's what a fantasy audience will expect to find when reading a fantasy book, playing a fantasy game, or watching a fantasy movie. Now, for us creators of fantasy, it's therefore important to understand these tropes in order to not only meet expectations, but also surprise our audience with new takes on old tropes. Today, I give you my view on the best and the worst trope when it comes to the fantasy genre. Let's get into it. Hi guys, my name is Jesper and welcome to the Fane of Fantasy. This channel is all about giving you inspiration to master your craft and create fantasy that will truly immerse your audience. I need to get this off my chest first before I give you the trope that I hate the most and my personal favorite. In watching this video, please keep in mind that tropes exist for a reason. It's what classifies fantasy as being fantasy, and I believe that any trope can be done well, even the one I hate the most, but at the same time, any trope can be done poorly, even the one I like the most. You see, it's a matter of how it's done. That said, we all have our favorites, don't we? In general, fantasy has magic in it. That's a fundamental trope, and I think we can all agree that without it, it doesn't feel much like fantasy. And yes, I mean that even when we are talking about a low fantasy setting where magic is very sparse, I would want to see a bit of magic. Some other common features is that it's set in a secondary world. This could be a remote past or a distant future or simply something made up. The inhabitants can be anything from humans to elves to dwarves to orcs, just to name a few, but it could also be some races that you create by yourself. Actually, come to think of it, I did talk a lot about the common tropes of fantasy in one of my older videos. I've placed a link to it right here on the screen, so head on over there and watch that video if you want to refresh your memory. I won't repeat it all again here, but instead tell you which one I love the most and which one I hate the most. And of course, if this is your first time here, do make sure to subscribe and learn to master the craft of creating immersing fantasy worlds, settings, and characters. I share new videos with you every single Monday. Let's begin with the trope that I hate the most, shall we? That way we can end on a positive. I think I like that the most. And I have to admit that it wasn't easy to decide. As I already said, all tropes can be done equally well and poor. Tropes are cliches, and when it comes down to it, nothing is really truly new. I'm digressing here, and it's because I'm really reluctant to name just one particular trope as the worst one, but yeah, I've already opened that door now, so I guess I have to walk through it. All right, you ready? If I'm forced to mention just one thing that I hate above all else in fantasy stories, then it's the one of the farm boy suddenly discovering that he is the one. There are different versions of this trope, of course. It can also be the ordinary kid in an urban fantasy setting that suddenly discovers that he or she is supposed to save the world. Or another alternative is where the protagonist suddenly discovers that he or she is a royal heir and voila, storms off to save everyone for some reason. My God. This trope has been beaten to death, and I really would hope that it just could remain dead. I much prefer stories in which the hero needs to use wits and skills to succeed, not just win because some kind of prophecy or it was meant to be comes into play. I hate that sort of thing. I'm sorry, rant over. Okay, put a smile back on the face and let's look at the trope that I really love instead. And again, this one was very difficult to decide on. As a close second, I had the one of a past civilization that was very much advanced but somehow became lost to history. Those sort of stories often offer a high level of discovery and exploration, which I do really like. But I decided on something else as my personal favorite. Since I write epic fantasy, it shouldn't surprise you that it has to do with stories about saving the world. I really love those sort of stories, but rather than being the one who does all the saving, I like to play in the gray area between good and evil. You know, stories where saving the world comes at a price, where you can actually wonder whether it was worth it or not. Or even maybe the villain is put in a situation where he or she can save the world and actually redeem themselves in the process, but they might not want to because of some other impacts. You see, these kind of moral questions are the ones that I enjoy the most. As with everything, and as already said, it all comes down to how the story is executed. That was what I was trying to say. But perhaps that's a topic for another day. I finished up my book on how to write fantasy book descriptions, and it currently sits with some beta readers, but I do expect to release it here in the very near future. Other than that, I'm still working on Module 6 for the future course on how to build fantasy worlds. I really like what this course is turning into, and I can say that from what I have seen, there is nothing like this course on the market at the moment. I will of course tell you more about the course when it becomes relevant, but I promise you that you are in for a real treat. Don't forget to follow me on social media if you haven't done so already. Besides that, all there is left to say is stay safe out there and see you next Monday.